What if I told you that the 4 letters that define your personality in the MBTI test were never used by Carl Jung, and that there's a decades-long conspiracy hiding who really created this system that millions of people use to define themselves? If you've ever taken the Myers-Briggs test and identify as INFJ, INFP, INTJ, or INTP, you need to know the truth behind these letters that have shaped your self-image. Before I reveal who actually created this system and why Jung's name was attached to it, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. This information will completely change how you see personality typing, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. The story begins in 1915 when Carl Jung published his groundbreaking work on psychological types. But here's what most people don't know. Jung never used letters to categorize personality. He never wrote about INFJ or INTJ or any combination of 4 letters. What Jung actually described was something far more complex and nuanced than what we see in modern personality tests. Jung identified 2 fundamental attitudes of consciousness: extraversion, where psychic energy flows outward toward the external world, and introversion, where energy flows inward toward the inner world of thoughts and reflections. But Jung didn't stop there. He also described 4 psychological functions: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. These functions, Jung believed, operated in different ways, depending on whether they were directed outward or inward. Think about this for a moment. Jung was describing the architecture of human consciousness itself. He wasn't creating a simple categorization system. He was mapping the fundamental ways human beings perceive and interact with reality. The thinking function processes information through logic and analysis. The feeling function evaluates through values and emotional significance. Sensation gathers information through the 5 senses and concrete experience. Intuition perceives possibilities, patterns, and potential meanings beyond immediate sensory data. But Jung's system was dynamic, not static. He believed that while people had dominant functions, they could develop and integrate other functions throughout their lives. This was part of what he called individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are. Jung saw personality not as a fixed category, but as a living, evolving expression of the psyche's attempt to achieve wholeness. So where did those 4 letters come from? The answer lies with 2 women whose names most people have never heard: Catherine Cook Briggs and her daughter Isabel Briggs Myers. In the 1940s, these 2 women took Jung's complex psychological theories and transformed them into something completely different. They created a systematic, letter-based categorization that Jung himself never endorsed or even acknowledged. Catherine Briggs first encountered Jung's work in 1923 and became fascinated with his theories. But she wanted something more practical, more applicable to everyday life. Along with her daughter Isabel, she began developing what would eventually become the Myers-Briggs type indicator. They added their own interpretations, created new categories, and most importantly, they introduced those 4 letters that millions now associate with Jung's name. The irony is profound. Jung spent his entire career warning against the dangers of putting people into rigid categories. He believed that every individual was unique, and that psychological types were simply tools for understanding, not boxes for containment. Yet the system that bears his name does exactly what he cautioned against. It reduces the infinite complexity of human personality into 16 neat categories. But there's something even more disturbing about this story. The widespread adoption of MBTI has created what Jung would have called a collective shadow. Millions of people now define themselves by 4 letters, limiting their self-perception and potential for growth. They say things like, "I'm an INFJ, so I can't do that," or "That's not how INTPs behave." They've turned Jung's dynamic understanding of personality into a psychological prison. Jung understood that the psyche resists categorization because it's alive, constantly changing, constantly seeking balance and integration. When you identify too strongly with any single type, you risk what Jung called inflation, where the ego becomes identified with a particular psychological pattern and loses touch with the broader spectrum of human potential. Consider this carefully. Every time you use those 4 letters to describe yourself, you're not connecting with Jung's wisdom. You're participating in a system that fundamentally misunderstands what Jung was trying to teach us about human nature. Jung wanted us to understand our psychological tendencies so we could transcend them, not so we could be trapped by them. The real tragedy is that Jung's actual insights about personality are far more liberating than the MBTI system. Jung taught that we all contain every psychological function within us. Yes, we may have natural preferences and dominant patterns, but we also have the capacity to develop what he called our inferior functions. The introverted thinker can learn to access their feeling function. The extroverted sensor can develop their intuitive capabilities. This is where Jung's concept of the transcendent function becomes crucial. Jung believed that psychological growth happens when we learn to bridge the opposites within ourselves, when thinking learns to dance with feeling, when sensation opens to intuition, when introversion finds its extroverted expression. This is not about changing your type. This is about becoming whole. But the MBTI system, with its rigid categories and letter combinations, actually prevents this kind of growth. It encourages people to stay within their type, to see other functions as foreign or difficult. It creates what Jung would have recognized as a form of psychological fundamentalism, where people become attached to their type identity rather than using it as a tool for self-understanding. Jung also understood something that the MBTI completely misses: the role of the unconscious in personality development. Jung believed that our conscious personality type is always balanced by an unconscious countertype. If you're consciously introverted and thinking-oriented, your unconscious will be extroverted and feeling-oriented. This creates a dynamic tension that drives psychological growth and prevents the personality from becoming too one-sided. The MBTI system ignores this unconscious dimension entirely. It treats personality as if it exists only in consciousness, as if the 4 letters tell the whole story. But Jung knew better. He understood that the unconscious is constantly compensating for the conscious attitude, creating dreams, symptoms, and life experiences that push us toward greater balance and integration. This is why Jung was so interested in the process he called enantiodromia, the tendency of psychological attitudes to transform into their opposites over time. The extreme introvert may find themselves drawn to extroverted experiences. The rigid thinker may discover the value of feeling. The practical sensor may develop a fascination with intuitive possibilities. This is not personality disorder. This is the psyche's natural movement toward wholeness. Now let's dive deeper into why this matters for your personal development and spiritual growth. When you understand that those 4 letters aren't actually Jung's creation, you free yourself from a limitation that may have been holding you back for years. You begin to see that personality typing, when used correctly, is not about defining who you are, but about understanding the current state of your psychological development. Jung viewed personality as a starting point, not a destination. He believed that the goal of human life was individuation, the process of becoming conscious of and integrating all aspects of your personality, including those parts that don't fit neatly into your supposed type. This is radically different from the MBTI approach, which encourages you to lean into your type and find others who complement your weaknesses. Think about how this plays out in real life. How many times have you heard someone say, "I'm an introvert, so I don't like networking," or "I'm a feeling type, so I'm not good with logic"? These statements reveal how the MBTI system has become a form of psychological limitation rather than liberation. Jung would have seen these as examples of what he called participation mystique, where people become unconsciously identified with external categories rather than developing their own authentic self-awareness. The truth is that Jung's original insights point towards something much more empowering. He taught that every human being contains what he called the transcendent function, the ability to bridge opposites and create new possibilities. This means that regardless of your natural preferences, you have the capacity to develop skills and abilities that might seem foreign to your type. The key is approaching this development consciously and intentionally. But here's where it gets really interesting. Jung discovered that our personality preferences often serve as defenses against aspects of ourselves that we find threatening or uncomfortable. The person who identifies strongly as a thinking type may be avoiding the vulnerability that comes with feeling. The extreme introvert may be running from the chaos and unpredictability of the external world. The intuitive type may be escaping the demands and limitations of physical reality. This is why Jung emphasized the importance of what he called shadow work. The shadow contains all the aspects of personality that don't fit into our conscious self-image. For someone who identifies as INFJ, the shadow might contain extroverted sensing, the ability to be spontaneous, physical, and present in the moment. For an INTJ, the shadow might hold extroverted feeling, the capacity for emotional expression and social connection. The MBTI system, by encouraging people to identify with their type, actually strengthens these psychological defenses. It gives people permission to avoid developing their shadow functions. But Jung understood that true psychological health requires integrating these rejected aspects of personality. This integration doesn't mean abandoning your natural preferences. It means expanding your repertoire of responses to life's challenges. Consider what happens when you stop seeing yourself as a fixed type and start seeing yourself as a dynamic system capable of growth and change. Suddenly, those situations that used to feel impossible become opportunities for development. The introverted intuitive can learn to engage with sensory experience. The thinking type can develop emotional intelligence. The judging type can embrace spontaneity and flexibility. This shift in perspective is not just psychological, it's spiritual. Jung understood that individuation is fundamentally a spiritual process, the soul's journey toward wholeness and authentic self-expression. When you free yourself from the limitations of type, you open yourself to what Jung called the self, the archetype of wholeness that transcends all partial identities. But there's another layer to this story that reveals just how far we've strayed from Jung's original vision. Jung believed that psychological types were not just individual phenomena, but cultural and historical patterns that reflected the collective consciousness of different eras. He saw the modern emphasis on thinking and sensation as a compensation for centuries of religious and feeling-oriented worldviews. From this perspective, the popularity of the MBTI system itself becomes a symptom of our culture's need to categorize, systematize, and control even the most intimate aspects of human experience. We've taken Jung's organic, dynamic understanding of personality and turned it into a corporate training tool, a dating app filter, a way to sort people into manageable categories. Jung would have been horrified by this development. He spent his life trying to help people break free from collective thinking and discover their individual path. He understood that true self-knowledge comes not from external categories, but from deep inner work, from paying attention to dreams, fantasies, and the subtle movements of the unconscious. This is where Jung's method of active imagination becomes crucial. Instead of taking a test to determine your type, Jung would encourage you to engage directly with your unconscious through creative expression, dialogue with inner figures, and careful attention to the symbolic language of the psyche. This is how you discover not just your conscious preferences, but the full spectrum of your psychological potential. The implications of this understanding are profound. If you've been limiting yourself based on your MBTI type, you've been living in a psychological box that Jung never created. You've been accepting limitations that aren't actually yours. You've been avoiding aspects of life that could bring tremendous growth and fulfillment. But here's the beautiful paradox. Once you understand that those 4 letters aren't the final word on who you are, you can begin to use them as Jung originally intended, as a starting point for self-exploration rather than a final destination. You can ask yourself, what aspects of my personality have I been neglecting? What functions have I been afraid to develop? What would it look like to embrace the fullness of my psychological potential? This is the real gift of Jung's work. Not a system that puts you in a box, but a map that helps you navigate the infinite territory of your own consciousness. Not a label that defines you, but a tool that helps you understand the current state of your development and the directions available for growth. Jung believed that the ultimate goal of psychological development was what he called the union of opposites, the integration of all aspects of personality into a harmonious whole. This doesn't mean becoming a bland, undifferentiated person. It means becoming someone who can access different aspects of themselves as situations require. Someone who is not trapped by their preferences, but empowered by their flexibility. So the next time someone asks you what your type is, remember that Jung never used those letters. Remember that the real question is not what type you are, but who you are becoming. Remember that your personality is not a prison, but a starting point for the greatest adventure of all, the journey toward becoming fully yourself. The truth about those 4 letters is that they represent not Jung's wisdom, but our culture's need to simplify what Jung knew was beautifully complex. Your personality is not a problem to be solved or a category to be assigned. It's a living, breathing expression of your soul's unique journey through this world. Take this knowledge and use it to free yourself from any limitations you've accepted based on your supposed type. Use it to explore aspects of yourself you've been avoiding. Use it to remember that you are not 4 letters, but an infinite being capable of growth, change, and transformation beyond anything any test could measure. What aspects of your personality have you been afraid to explore? What would change in your life if you stopped seeing yourself as a fixed type and started seeing yourself as a work in progress? These are the questions Jung would want you to ask, and the answers will lead you far beyond any 4-letter combination toward the truth of who you really are.